Jake Carter sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the packed suitcase by his feet. His hands trembled as he tied the laces of his worn-out shoes. His heart pounded in his chest, but he told himself this was the right thing to do. He had no choice. Life had become too hard, and he didn't know how to fix it. Emily, his wife, was sleeping in the next room. The soft glow of the nightlight spilled into the hallway, casting shadows on the walls. He could hear her slow, steady breathing. She was 7 months pregnant, carrying their first child. Or at least, that's what he thought. He had no idea she would soon discover the truth. She was carrying 4 babies, not 1. Jake felt a sharp pain in his chest as he thought about the life growing inside her. A father. He was supposed to be a father. But how could he be a father when he couldn't even take care of himself? Bills kept piling up on the kitchen counter. Rent was overdue. The fridge was nearly empty. Every day felt like a battle, and Jake was losing. He had tried to find better work, but nothing paid enough. He watched Emily struggle, trying to stay strong, trying to make everything seem okay. But he saw the worry in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. One night, he sat outside under the dark sky, staring at the stars. He thought about the life he dreamed of: a big house, a happy family, and enough money to give his child everything they needed. But that dream felt so far away. He convinced himself that Emily would be better off without him. Maybe if he left, she could find someone stronger, someone who could give her a better life. Maybe their child would grow up never knowing what it was like to have a father who felt like a failure. Taking a deep breath, Jake grabbed his suitcase and walked to the door. His fingers hovered over the doorknob. He turned his head one last time, looking at the small apartment they shared. The faded couch where they used to sit and talk for hours. The tiny kitchen where Emily laughed as she tried new recipes. The baby crib she had set up in the corner of their room, its soft blue blankets neatly folded. A lump formed in his throat. He wanted to stay. A part of him screamed at him to stay. But fear was louder. Fear told him he wasn't good enough. Fear told him he would only make things worse. So before the morning sun could rise, before Emily could wake up and stop him, Jake opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't know that years later, he would regret this moment more than anything in his life. Emily woke up to the sound of silence. At first, she thought Jake was in the other room, maybe making coffee or getting ready for work. But as she sat up and looked around, something felt different. The air was heavy, almost like the walls themselves knew something was wrong. She glanced at the clock. 6:30 a.m. Jake usually woke up later than this. A strange feeling settled in her chest as she slid out of bed and walked toward the living room. The moment she stepped inside, her heart sank. The suitcase was gone. The shoes Jake always left by the door, gone. Her hands shook as she ran to the closet, hoping, praying that maybe she was imagining things, but his clothes were missing. The few things he owned had disappeared. No, 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 she whispered, rushing to check the bathroom, the kitchen, even outside the apartment. But he wasn't there. Tears welled up in her eyes as she slowly sat down on the couch, her hands clutching her belly. She had been so excited to start this new chapter of their lives together. They had talked about baby names, about decorating the nursery, about how they would raise their child. But now, he was gone. She didn't want to believe it. Maybe something happened. Maybe he had to leave for an emergency. Maybe he would walk through the door any minute now, smiling and apologizing for making her worry. But deep down, she knew the truth. He had left her. A sharp pain shot through her stomach, making her gasp. She placed a hand over her belly, whispering softly, "It's okay, baby. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." The next few days were the hardest of her life. She barely slept, barely ate. She kept checking her phone, hoping for a message, a call, anything. But Jake never reached out. His number was disconnected. It was as if he had vanished completely. Then, just as she thought things couldn't get worse, she went in for her routine checkup. The doctor smiled at her warmly, asking how she was feeling. Emily forced a smile back, not wanting to admit how broken she felt inside. But nothing could have prepared her for what the doctor said next. "Emily," he said, his voice gentle but filled with surprise. "You're not having one baby. You're having 4. Her heart nearly stopped. "F4, she stammered, gripping the edge of the table. "Yes," the doctor confirmed. "Quadruplets. It's rare, but it looks like you're going to be a mother of 4 little ones." Tears streamed down her face. She wasn't sure if she was crying from shock, fear, or love. She had been preparing for one baby, but now she had 4 lives depending on her. Jake was gone. But she couldn't be weak. For her children, she had to be stronger than ever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Emily's life was now a whirlwind of doctor visits, preparing for the babies, and trying to keep her head above water. She'd cried, she'd yelled, she'd asked herself 1,000 times why Jake had left her. But in the end, there was only one thing she could do: survive. She set aside her broken heart and focused on what mattered: her children. The pregnancy was harder than she had imagined. Carrying 4 babies at once was exhausting, and every day seemed to bring new challenges. Her back ached, her feet swelled, and she was often out of breath. But through it all, Emily found strength she didn't know she had. She had to. Emily didn't have the luxury of feeling sorry for herself. She had 4 little lives growing inside her, and they needed her to be strong. With Jake gone, Emily leaned on her family and friends for support. Her parents came over regularly, bringing food and helping her prepare the nursery. Her mother's gentle hands helped her fold baby clothes, while her father made sure the crib was set up correctly. Even her neighbors stepped in. Mrs. Thompson, an older woman who lived across the hall, made sure Emily never ran out of groceries. She'd knock on the door with bags full of fresh produce, always making sure to remind Emily, "You're not alone, dear. We're all here for you." Despite all the support, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. She missed Jake more than she cared to admit. She missed the man she had once fallen in love with, the man who had promised to be there through thick and thin. It hurt every time she thought of him. But she couldn't afford to stay in that place. She had to keep moving forward. As the months passed, Emily prepared for the arrival of her babies. She learned everything she could about raising quadruplets: how to feed them, how to sleep train them, how to make sure they grew up strong and healthy. She spent hours reading books and watching videos, taking notes, and asking her family for advice. When the day finally came, Emily wasn't sure she was ready, but there was no turning back. The pain of childbirth was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the joy she felt when she saw her 4 babies for the first time. Liam, the oldest, was the quiet one, with big brown eyes and a head full of soft, dark hair. Noah, always kicking and moving, was the smallest but had the loudest cry. Ava was a gentle soul, always looking around with wide eyes, while Sophie, the youngest, seemed to be the most alert, her tiny fingers gripping Emily's hand from the very first moment. She couldn't believe they were finally here. In that moment, Emily knew, without a doubt, that she would give them everything. She would protect them with all her strength. She would love them the way Jake never could. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Raising 4 children on her own wasn't what she had imagined, but it was what she had to do. And for the first time in months, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Years passed, and Emily's life began to find its rhythm. Raising 4 children was never easy, but with each passing day, she grew more confident. The babies had turned into toddlers, and the toddlers into energetic, curious children. Liam, Noah, Ava, and Sophie had become her entire world, her purpose, her everything. They were the light of her life, and she did everything she could to make sure they felt loved and safe. But even though Emily had found peace in her new life, there was still a part of her that couldn't forget the man who had abandoned her. Jake's absence was like a hole in her heart that she had learned to live with, but it never fully healed. She still wondered what he was doing, if he ever thought about her or their children. Did he ever regret leaving? Did he ever wonder how the kids had turned out? Emily never let herself dwell on it too long, though. There was no time for that. The kids needed her, but there were moments when her mind wandered back to the past, back to that empty apartment, and the feeling of being alone in the world. One evening, as Emily was scrolling through her phone, she saw something that made her freeze. There on the news feed was a photo of quadruplets. Her heart skipped a beat. It was a news article about a family with quadruplets in a small town not far from hers. The children in the photo looked so familiar. They were around the same age as her kids, and though they didn't share her children's exact features, there was something in the way they smiled, the way they looked at each other, that made Emily's breath catch in her throat. She leaned closer to the screen, her fingers trembling as she read the caption. The article spoke about the family's struggles, how they had faced challenges but were slowly finding their way. It mentioned how the father had been absent for several years, but the family had persevered despite his absence. Emily's mind raced. Could it be? Could it really be? The children in the photo looked too much like her own to be a coincidence, but she hadn't heard anything about Jake being in the area. He had disappeared from her life without a trace. Still, something in her gut told her this wasn't just a random article. She felt a pull, a strange connection, and before she could stop herself, Emily found herself writing a message. She hesitated before pressing send, but something inside her urged her forward. I think I know those children. They look a lot like my own. She paused, unsure of what to expect. As days passed, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew she had to find out the truth. Was Jake really back? Were these children hers as well? Was this some kind of twist of fate, or just a strange coincidence? Emily didn't know the answers, but one thing was certain. Her life was about to take a turn she could never have imagined. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty and nervous anticipation. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the message she had sent. She kept checking her phone, hoping for a reply, but nothing came. The silence felt heavier with each passing day. She wondered if she had made a mistake. What if she was wrong? What if these children weren't connected to her at all? But deep down, a part of her couldn't let go. There was something about those faces in the photo, something familiar. Maybe it was the way they smiled, or maybe it was just the way life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. Finally, almost a week later, Emily received a message. Her heart raced as she opened it. The response was short, but it sent a chill through her. You're right. These are my children. I think we need to talk. The message was signed simply, Jake Carter. Emily stared at the screen, unable to believe what she was reading. Jake, the man who had left her so many years ago. The man she had spent years trying to forget. She couldn't understand why he was reaching out now. What had happened in all the years since he disappeared? Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion. Should she respond? What would she even say to him after everything? She had worked so hard to move on, to build a life for her children without him. And now he was back. Finally, after what felt like hours, Emily took a deep breath and typed a reply. We can meet, but I don't know what you expect from me. Jake, it's been a long time. I'm not sure what you want, but we can talk. She hit send, then immediately regretted it. What was she doing? She didn't want to open this door again. The years of pain, the disappointment, the feeling of abandonment, they were all rushing back to the surface. But she couldn't undo it now. A few hours later, she received another message. I know I can't undo the past. I know I can't change what I did. But I want to see my kids. I want to try to make things right, if you'll let me. Jake's words were simple, but they hit Emily hard. After all these years, after all the hurt, he was asking for a chance to make things right. The thought of her children meeting their father made Emily's stomach turn. They had grown up without him, and they were fine. They were happy. They didn't need Jake, and they certainly didn't need him to mess up their lives again. But at the same time, Emily knew that if Jake truly wanted to be a part of their lives, she couldn't just shut him out forever. With a heavy heart, she replied, "Okay, we'll meet, but it will be on my terms. You'll need to prove yourself to me and to the kids. I'm not sure if I can trust you again, but we'll see." The decision had been made. Emily wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. This was the beginning of something new, something neither she nor Jake had been prepared for. The day of the meeting arrived sooner than Emily had expected. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she prepared for what could be the most difficult moment of her life. She had spent so many years building a life without Jake, convincing herself that she didn't need him. Now he was coming back, asking for a place in her children's lives, and part of her felt both angry and nervous. Could she really let him back in after everything he had done? Her 4 children were playing in the living room, laughing and running around as they always did. They didn't know what was about to happen. They didn't know who Jake was or why their mother seemed so tense. Emily glanced at them, her heart swelling with love. These children were everything to her. She would protect them with every ounce of strength she had, but now she had to make a choice. "Mom, are you okay?" Sophie, the youngest, asked, looking up from her drawing. Emily forced a smile, crouching down to meet her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little nervous, that's all." Noah, ever the curious one, tilted his head. "Why? Who's coming over?" Emily hesitated. She had planned to tell them that a man from her past would be visiting, but the words seemed too complicated. They were too young to understand the full story. She finally said, "He's someone I used to know. I just want to make sure everything goes okay." Ava nodded, accepting her answer with the trust only a child could have. Liam, the oldest, stayed quiet but gave his mother a reassuring smile. The doorbell rang, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. This was it. She took a deep breath before walking to the door, her legs feeling like they weighed 1,000 pounds. She opened it slowly, and there he was, Jake. He looked different than she remembered. The years had been kind to him in some ways. He had a bit of gray in his hair now, his face more lined than it had been when he left. But there was still something familiar about him. The way his eyes looked at her, a mixture of guilt and hope. "Hi, Emily," Jake said quietly, his voice softer than she remembered. "Jake," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "Come in." He stepped inside, and the air seemed to shift. The children, sensing something unfamiliar, stopped what they were doing and stared at the stranger standing in the doorway. "Mom, who's this?" Liam asked, his voice cautious. "This is someone I used to know," Emily said, looking at Jake, unsure of how to introduce him. Jake bent down to their level, his face gentle but full of emotion. "Hi, I'm Jake. I'm your dad." The room fell silent. The kids stared at him with wide eyes, unsure of what to say. They had grown up with no father figure, so the idea of meeting one was foreign to them. Liam, always the brave one, asked, "Why did you leave us?" Emily's heart clenched at the question. She had wondered that herself for so long. Jake opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out at first. He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Emily's, before he spoke again. "I made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was scared, and I thought leaving would be better for all of us. But I was wrong. I'm sorry, and I know I can't change the past. But I want to be a part of your lives, if you'll let me." The room was heavy with silence. Emily watched her children, wondering what they were thinking. They had every right to be angry with him, to shut him out completely. She wanted to protect them from the hurt Jake had caused, but she also knew that they deserved the truth. "Mom," Noah whispered, looking up at her. Emily swallowed hard, glancing at Jake. "We'll take this one step at a time," she said softly. "I don't know where this will go, but we'll figure it out together." Jake nodded, as if understanding that this was only the beginning of a long journey. Emily didn't know if he was truly ready to be the father her children deserved, but she knew this was a chance for them all to try. The days following Jake's visit were full of uncertainty. Emily tried to stay calm, but a storm of emotions churned inside her. She didn't know what to expect, didn't know how to process everything that had happened. Jake had returned after years of silence, and now he was trying to make amends, trying to be a part of their lives again. But how could she trust him after everything? Could he really be the father he claimed to be, or was this just another empty promise? Emily found herself caught between wanting to give him a chance and wanting to protect her children from the hurt he might cause. She spent long nights thinking about it, replaying the conversation in her head. Could she allow him back into their lives without disrupting everything they had worked so hard to build? As the days went by, Jake did his best to prove that he was serious. He sent Emily a message almost every day, asking how the kids were doing, asking if he could help with anything. At first, Emily kept her responses short, not wanting to get too close too quickly. She still had so many questions, so many doubts. Then, one Saturday morning, Jake suggested they all meet at the park. "I know it's a lot to ask," he said over the phone, "but I'd really like to spend time with the kids, just get to know them. I don't expect anything from them, but I want to show them I care." Emily hesitated. The kids were still adjusting to the idea of having him back in their lives, and she didn't want to push them too hard. But she also knew this was the only way to see if Jake was really serious about being a father. So, after some thought, she agreed. "Okay, we can meet, but let's keep it low-key, just a simple outing." That Saturday, they arrived at the park. Emily's heart was racing as she led the kids toward the playground. Jake was already there, standing by a bench, looking nervous but determined. He smiled when he saw them, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Emily could tell he was still carrying the weight of his past mistakes, and she wasn't sure if he would ever fully be able to let go of the guilt. The kids were quiet at first, not sure what to make of this strange man who claimed to be their father. Liam, the oldest, took the lead, walking up to Jake with a cautious but curious look on his face. "Are you really our dad?" Liam asked, his voice serious. Jake knelt down to Liam's level, his expression soft. "Yes, I am," he said gently. "And I'm sorry I wasn't there for you before. I can't change what I did, but I want to be here now. If you'll let me, I'd love to get to know you." There was a long silence as the kids exchanged looks. Ava was the first to speak, her voice small but thoughtful. "How come you left us?" she asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. Jake took a deep breath. "I made a lot of mistakes," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I thought leaving was the best thing I could do at the time, but I was wrong. I should have stayed. I should have been there for all of you." Emily watched as the kids processed his words. It wasn't easy for them to understand, and she didn't expect them to forgive him right away. But she could see something in their faces, a flicker of curiosity, a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the first step. Maybe, just maybe, Jake could find a place in their lives again. As the afternoon passed, Emily saw Jake trying, really trying, to connect with each of the kids. He pushed them on the swings, laughed with them as they played tag, and helped them climb the jungle gym. Slowly but surely, the walls between them began to crack. The kids were still cautious, still uncertain, but they were warming to him. By the end of the day, as they sat on a bench together, Emily felt a small weight lift off her shoulders. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be bumps along the way. But she was starting to believe that Jake might actually be ready to be the father her children deserved. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to feel a tiny spark of hope. As weeks turned into months, Emily began to notice a gradual shift in her family. It wasn't perfect, but something had started to change. Jake was making the effort. Every weekend, he would come by to spend time with the kids. Sometimes it was a trip to the park. Other times it was just playing games at home or helping them with school projects. Slowly, Emily could see the walls that had once surrounded her children's hearts beginning to come down. At first, the kids were hesitant. Liam, the oldest, was still unsure about letting Jake in. He had lived most of his life without a father, and the idea of someone suddenly claiming to be one felt strange. But with each passing day, Liam began to soften. He started asking Jake questions, talking to him about school, about his friends, about his dreams. Jake answered every question patiently, never rushing, always showing interest in what Liam had to say. Noah, who had always been the more trusting one, was a little quicker to warm up. He liked having Jake around, and it was clear that the bond between them was starting to grow. Sophie, the quiet one, was still a little shy around Jake, but Emily noticed that whenever he spoke to her, there was a light in her eyes. Ava, always the thoughtful one, seemed to be taking it all in. She asked Jake a lot of questions too, but with a careful consideration that only a child could have. For Emily, it wasn't easy to watch this transformation. She still couldn't fully trust Jake, not yet, but there was something in his actions that made her believe he was trying. He was showing up. He was making an effort, not just with the kids, but with her too. He respected her boundaries and never pushed her for more than she was ready to give. He understood that trust had to be earned, and he was willing to work for it. One evening, after the kids were tucked in bed, Emily sat on the couch, exhausted but content. Jake was sitting beside her, his presence comforting in a way she hadn't expected. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. They had spent so many years apart, and yet in this moment, it felt as though they were finally starting to understand each other again. "I never thought this day would come," Emily said quietly, her voice soft. "I didn't think you'd come back, Jake. I didn't think I could let you back in, not after everything." Jake turned to her, his expression sincere. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve the chance to be a part of their lives. But I'm trying. I really am. I just want to be here for them. For you, if you'll let me." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so long carrying the weight of their past, the hurt and the anger, that it was hard to let go of all those years of pain. But hearing Jake speak from the heart, seeing the effort he was putting into being there for their family, made her believe, if only for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new together. "It's not going to be easy," she said, wiping away a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. "But we'll try. We'll take it one step at a time." Jake nodded, his eyes full of gratitude. "That's all I'm asking for." The next few months were filled with small victories. There were moments of doubt, moments when Emily wondered if she had made the right choice, but each day, Jake proved that he was here for the long haul. The kids started asking about their father more, seeking him out when they needed advice or comfort. They weren't just accepting him as a father, they were beginning to trust him. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still bumps in the road, and it took time for everyone to truly heal. But Emily could see the change in her children. They were growing up with the love of a father they had never known, and it was something she couldn't deny. In the end, Emily realized that life wasn't about perfection. It was about trying, about showing up for the people you love, even when it's hard. Jake had returned, and while the journey wasn't over, Emily knew they were finally heading in the right direction.